All right. Welcome everyone to Mad Security's fifth Maritime Town Hall. My objective is to present timely and relevant topics in maritime cybersecurity, and also sometimes to bring in experts to discuss these topics. A good maritime phrase is a rising tide raises all boats, and with this series, I'm hoping to contribute to that in a very meaningful way. A little bit about me. Cybersecurity and especially maritime cybersecurity is not just a job for me, it's a hobby. I'm involved in a lot of different organizations with the maritime cybersecurity ecosystem. And so I want to make very clear that my views and statements in this discussion are not at all the views of the U.S. Coast Guard. They're not the views of any other organizations that I'm part of. We're just trying to raise the bar here for maritime cybersecurity, bring folks together to solve challenges that I've been a part of for decades. I am a retired Coast Guard commander and have a lot of experience doing maritime cybersecurity, and also do a little bit of teaching, and very involved in a lot of different maritime organizations. As maritime operations continue to become more reliant on digital systems, they're also becoming more vulnerable to attacks. Things like Starlink have presented opportunities, but they've also introduced vulnerabilities and challenges as well. These challenges can disrupt shipping schedules, create safety hazards, and even impact national security. The Coast Guard recognized that this growing risk exists and is taking steps to provide guidance and ultimately to enforce cybersecurity through regulatory action. And that's what we're going to talk about today: is the Coast Guard cybersecurity and the maritime transportation system final rule. So diving into the rule itself was published on January 17th of this year, with enforcement beginning on July 16th. And the rule marks a very significant step in maritime security policy because it establishes standards across the maritime transportation system. And the quote here at the bottom comes very directly from the final rule itself, and talks about the baseline standards, where they come from, and we'll talk more about the CISA CPGs, the Cybersecurity Performance Goals, here in a bit on another slide. So here's where I put on my CISO hat, and we've talked on these webinars in the past that you should focus on security, and if you do, compliance will follow. Whereas if you try to just check the boxes and chase compliance, sometimes you can be compliant and not secure, and that's not a great situation to be in. So the good thing about these CISA CPGs are that they are outcome focused. And so we're going to investigate and actually go through an example of what one of those look like, so you can kind of see where the Coast Guard's coming from on this. So the rule applies to U.S. flagged vessels, outer continental shelf facilities, and any facilities that are regulated under MITSA, the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002. So if you operate in any of these spaces, you're expected to comply. Um, Even if you're not, the final rule and the standards and the guidelines that comprise them are still very, very useful to those who aren't regulated and don't fall under this. They're good cybersecurity practices to follow. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Here's an example of one of the cybersecurity performance goals that DHS has put out. And they're organized along the NIST Cybersecurity Framework: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And the cybersecurity performance goals follow the same cadence from goal to goal. And that's that they talk about the outcome, they talk about the tactic, technique, and procedure or risk addressed. They discuss scope, whether it's IT, OT assets, and then they provide recommended actions as well. And so these were designed to be widely applicable, not just for the maritime vertical. These CISA cybersecurity performance goals are designed to be applicable to any vertical. So, what you have is license to take these, look at the outcome here, and apply it to maritime cybersecurity and your own individual use case. One of the other things that we want to talk about is that the actual rule itself does not provide much relief in the way of being able to get around the actual requirements. And so if you have a deviation from what the rule actually says, um, in their own words, the Coast Guard is not relaxing the requirements further for US flag vessels. So if folks don't comply, they have to submit a waiver or equivalent using the procedures that they state elsewhere in the document. And so, in my humble opinion, you should take a look at this early. What you really need to do is look at what your environment is, look at what the standards and outcomes are, and figure out in advance where you're going to be askew of these elements of the final rule so that you can early on put in a waiver, put in an equivalence, and request for that. Because there's going to probably be a significant amount of waivers and requests for equivalency. So, and also what this does is kind of forces you to understand and be able to articulate the spirit of the control, right? Because you can't just ask for a waiver without any kind of strong consideration or strong mitigation or countermeasures. So what you need to do is be very thoughtful in how you present the waivers and include things like countermeasures, any type of operational considerations that should be taken into effect. So it's important to get ahead of these early, make sure that you have your vision for how you're going to meet all of these controls and standards and put in for a waiver if you don't think you're going to be able to. So the rule sets out 4 core requirements. First, each organization must appoint a cybersecurity officer in writing, and that person's responsible for implementing the plan and coordinating responses to threats. I actually love this rule because my first rule of cybersecurity and building a successful cybersecurity program is that somebody has to be responsible. And as it stands now, or has in the past, when you go into a port, sometimes if you ask, okay, so who's responsible for cybersecurity? You might get the FSO, you might get the IT person, you might get the risk officer, you might get different answers wherever you go. And what this does is it specifically puts the rose on somebody's collar that, hey, they're the ones responsible as the cybersecurity officer for meeting the demands of this. And that's a very important element to meet. Second, there must be an annual assessment that's conducted. And that assessment should take into account technical elements as well as assessments of your policies and procedures. Um, Third, you need to have a cybersecurity plan developed. I found it odd that this was the third bullet. I think this should have been the second bullet because you can't really have the assessment without having your plan to assess against. But the plan itself, the good news is that most of the folks already have that as part of their facility security plan, cyber annex, or however they've been addressing that as part of what came out of NAVIC 01-20 and other places. So the cybersecurity plan should be in place, it should be mature now. And so bullet 2 then talks about assessing it. And then bullet number 4 is a very novel concept, and it says that you must be actually operating in accordance with your cybersecurity plan. And that's kind of funny to me because frequently folks do have policies and procedures that are shelfware, right? They write it all out and then, okay, are they actually following it or not? Who knows? So to specifically call out that you actually have to operate in accordance with that plan makes it clear that the Coast Guard expects that that the controls that you say are going to be implemented and carried out in the way that you've said they would in the plan. And I believe that this is also allows the Coast Guard to rely more, much more on the plan if you know that the plan is being implemented and if the assumption is that it is. So I mentioned that you should do your cybersecurity plan before you assess. So let's start there. Your plan has to be comprehensive and proactive. It needs to include assessment of your systems, your incident response plan, and a strategy for recovery. Just as important, it must be a living document. It's got to be something that you audit and update regularly. As your systems change, as the threat landscape changes, you've got to update this plan to meet the challenges that you're going to be facing in protecting your information and information systems. So the Coast Guard outlines 7 account security practices to protect access. And those include assigning unique user IDs, enforcing strong password rules, enabling multi-factor authentication. It also calls for limiting access based on role, logging all user activity. That's kind of a big one. A lot of folks aren't logging, or if they are logging, they're not really checking their logs. And performing regular reviews to ensure only necessary access is granted. So I would have liked to have seen segmentation called out specifically here as item number 8 or as one of the items. And we'll talk about why in the next slide. The good news is that segmentation is covered frequently throughout this document. And I think that, segmentation is one of the very critical parts of maritime cybersecurity, especially IT/OT systems. So getting back to these 7, though, these aren't optional suggestions. They're necessary safeguards to prevent unauthorized access and reduce the likelihood of a successful cyber attack. Um, as I mentioned, segmentation, potentially being 8, but it's called out specifically in section 101.650. And I'm going to foot stomp here and say that it's an absolute must in maritime cybersecurity. Someone is going to find a way in. A determined nation state, a determined and resourced adversary is going to find a way in, and or one of your users is going to do something silly, or one of your administrators is going to do something silly. There'll be an unpatched box, there'll be a misconfigured firewall or router. Someone is going to get into your network if they want to. And so what you have to do is you have to minimize the damage, limit their ability to move laterally within your system, and particularly keep your OT systems separated as much as possible. Yes, it can be challenging, but you have to address it as a major consideration in your strategy. And here's a visual that kind of compares network segmentation to progressive flooding. I really like this analogy because it's a maritime analogy. And so, if you don't have segmentation in any one of these compartments get flooded, you're going to have progressive flooding throughout, and the whole ship will sink. But if you have segments and you have compartmentalization, then you can minimize the amount of damage that's done and limit it to that specific segment. So the role of the cybersecurity officer is an important one. They play a central role in executing the cybersecurity plan, as well as training personnel and serving as a primary contact during a cybersecurity incident. They don't necessarily have to be a full-time hire, but they must have the authority and knowledge to manage cyber responsibilities effectively. So you can have someone that does this as part of their normal duty. So if you have an FSO that you want to designate as your cybersecurity officer, that's okay, but they have to be capable and trained of being able to meet the demands and meet the knowledge level commensurate with this position, this role that the Coast Guard expects. And again, I've directly quoted the cybersecurity in the maritime transportation system here. I try to do that wherever possible as a source document. The rule doesn't mandate specific tools, but it does outline expected categories of controls. And these include access control protocols, multi-factor authentication, regular patching and system updates, and real-time network monitoring. And that doesn't just mean monitoring whether a network is up or down. It means monitoring for anomaly detection and things like that to be able to see what's going on in your network. So what matters the most is demonstrating that your systems are protected using best practices that are appropriate to your level of risk. And because the Coast Guard is using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which is a wise move, that's a maturity model. And so, the level of risk for certain large facilities that have significant technology won't be the same as maybe a rock dock on the Great Lakes. So what you have to do is you have to apply the appropriate controls given your situation and your level of risk. This rule also very much emphasizes training and drills. And so operations must train staff regularly and run cyber drills just like fire evacuation drills. This isn't a surprise. We saw this with the job aid that was published frequently, and the Coast Guard definitely likes their exercises and drills. And I see them do that a lot at the Area Maritime Security Committee level, being involved in doing a lot of exercises and drills. And these drills ensure that the cybersecurity plan actually works when put in practice, that folks are aware of what roles that they're supposed to hold within the ecosystem of your RACI matrix of what who's responsible, accountable, who should be informed. And it also identifies gaps. So as folks are doing these drills, they should make a note and bring their lessons learned as a feedback loop back into the cybersecurity plan. What we find in the Area Maritime Security Committee tabletop exercises is that frequently one of the most challenging things isn't technical. It's who are you calling to get services restored? Who are you calling to let know that there is some type of outage, that you've lost some type of capability, whether that be working with the port, the vessel traffic system, the power company, the internet provider. If a lot of things rely on that. When the internet goes out, you kind of know there are some capabilities that are lost sometimes. So running these training and running these drills at the micro and macro level will allow you to identify where the holes are in your cybersecurity plan and keep your folks ready for when that bad day comes. The rule also sets out a reportable cybersecurity incident. And specifically, what they mean is that it can reasonably lead to any of these four types of actions. One is, loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability, disruption or adverse impact on reporting abilities, entities' ability to engage in business operations. Pretty much anything that would rise, and definitely anything that might lead to a TSI, right? So those of us that operate in the maritime community know what a transportation, what a security incident is defined in 33 CFR. So the objective of these rules is to prevent a security incident and specifically a TSI. So when it does happen, though, these are examples of reportable incidents, and they're reported to the National Response Center, which is the same entity that's used for reporting for physical maritime incidents. So it's consistent, which is good. You're not separating things out, and sometimes it can be really challenging to be able to separate those out. Physical and cyber security can be inextricably linked. And so the fact that it's a consolidated place where all of these incidents are reported makes all the sense in the world. And timeliness does matter. So the sooner the Coast Guard is aware of the threat, the faster they can help respond. The Coast Guard does have teams of folks that they've used to help before with incidents in ports and waterways. And so, that's where a good relationship, good rapport with the captain of the port, with your port partners comes into play as far as, making sure to report those so that other folks don't fall prey to the same tactics, techniques, and procedures that you might have fallen prey to. So looking ahead, the Coast Guard cybersecurity in the maritime transportation system is a point in time rule. And as cyber threats evolve, what I see is that the rule will have to evolve as well, just like CMMC does with the Department of Defense, just like any other standard anywhere. As technology continues to increase, as more and more threats are and threat actors are unveiled, it will have to adapt. So, things to consider are AI-powered defense tools to counter the AI-powered attacks. Um, the adversaries are using AI for all kinds of things, ranging from, of course, voice impersonation to, phishing to automating attacks technically. So the other thing is that increased use of satellite comms is going to lead to new vulnerabilities. I already kind of covered the advent of Starlink and what that does. And, what I've learned is that if you provide bandwidth to a ship, whatever bandwidth you provide, they'll figure out how to use it all. And we're working with several organizations right now where they have Starlink, and they still very much limit the amount of bandwidth that we have available for security operations because there's so much being used by the ship itself and by the people on board the ship. So, but that use of satellite comms, just like 5G did in the ports, It's going to lead to more connected things, more data going over it, and more access for bad people to get into the system potentially. Um, we're also going to potentially see that cyber risk may influence shipping routes, depending upon what kind of threat actors are targeting us and what's going on there. They may actually influence shipping routes as far as places we go and don't go, based upon what cyber activity might be occurring. Uh, we can also expect expanded regulations. Right now, there's a crawl, walk, run approach. The Coast Guard's been very deliberate in rolling this out and in being collaborative. Everything I've seen from the Coast Guard thus far has been collaborative and very little, if any, regulatory in nature. Their opening entering argument is that they're trying to help get the maritime transportation sector where it needs to be. And so I haven't seen a whole lot of regulatory type of actions. However, at some point that switch will probably flip. Don't know when that will be. You'd have to talk to them, but at some point that will flip, and I think that maybe it'll flip with folks that aren't doing anything, right? The folks that haven't demonstrated any kind of commitment whatsoever to doing their part in the maritime transportation system. Cyber insurance is going to continue to be a huge thing, and you can get pretty significant reductions on cyber insurance for being compliant with a lot of these rules. And insurance companies send out questionnaires that ask about your cybersecurity posture. I've seen in the past folks who have overestimated their cyber posture with cyber insurance and not been paid out because it was borne out that their the policy that they had was quoted at a lower risk than what they actually were. So cyber insurance can be used as a good tool, but you have to be very, very careful about how you fill out the questionnaires, and they're getting more and more detailed from those insurance companies. Technology integration, ITOT, has been converging for a long time. Almost, everything from water separating systems, or to testing oil in the water. There's a lot of VPNs that are in place on some of the commercial ships that are out there to test for water and oil and things like that. And then continued collaboration. Cybersecurity is a team sport. One of my mentors, John Felker, always used to say that, and that resonated with me. It truly is a team sport. The local government, the federal government, the ship owners, facility owners, the public utilities, everyone has to work together to make sure that our ecosystem is secure. So we're going to be looking forward to continued collaboration, and trying to increase that throughout the network. And that concludes my slideshow. And what I'd like to do now is see if anybody has any questions. See, right, I do have one. Okay, so the question is, when do I see this actually going into effect, right? So in July is when the rule will be final. The Coast Guard already has maritime transportation security specialist cyber at each captain of the port facility, at each sector, and some of the marine safety units. So again, I think it'll be that crawl, walk, run. It's really hard to say when they're gonna, when and if they'll ever flip the switch on being regulatory in nature. But my guess, if I had to guess, would be it'll be a couple of years, unless something is quite egregious. So I think that everybody just needs to, you know, do the right thing from a cybersecurity perspective, take an active interest in it, do the things that are in the final rule. And none of these things are really rocket science. None of these things are things that you shouldn't already be doing, right? I've been through this over and over again, going through the rule. There's nothing in there that I looked at and said, "Oh, this just isn't doable." Most of them are standard, based on NIST, what businesses should be doing anyways. So, I always recommend to folks that they just get on board and do it because it's going to be good for your business and a lot of folks should be doing it anyways. See. Nope. Any other questions? All right. Well, if not, then we'll go ahead and wrap up and give you your time back. But as always, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be at the Cyber Summit as well as the DEF CON Maritime Hacking Village. Hit me up and at cneve@madsecinc.com anytime or on LinkedIn. Happy to chat about the state of maritime cyber and strategies at any point. But again, appreciate everybody's time and hopefully you have a wonderful day. Cheers.